Hey guys! Tonight we tumble into the thunderclouds of Olympus itself. No comfy ambrosia or harp music here, just a smoking battlefield, and the god of war standing over a very dead demigod. You're dropped in the middle of the Athenian hills. Wines hissing through wild olive trees, the scent of ozone hanging like a warning. Ares' armor clinks as he turns, and the blood at his feet is still steaming. You're not a hero, not tonight. You're more like a confused, slightly chilly observer stuck between titanic tempers and immortal bureaucracy. You're about to witness the divine trial of Ares, yes, that Ares, for the murder of Halorothias, the son of Poseidon. A courtroom drama Greek myth style, which is to say loud, deeply personal, and wildly lacking in precedent. You probably won't survive this, at least not without hearing way too much family drama among deities who treat murder like a scheduling conflict. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from somewhere interesting, drop your city and your local time in the comments. I love seeing who else is still awake. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Dondios, you stand ankle-deep in trampled dirt where the hill of Areopagus rises outside ancient Athens. It's dusk, an orange haze of sky and blood. The battle's over, but the god of war is not done yet. Ares wipes his blade, disgusted at how boring this kill was. His opponent Halorothias, a minor demigod with a big mouth and an unfortunate tendency to trespass. According to one version of the myth, Halorothias tried to assault Ares' daughter Alcippe. You're standing by the battered shrine where it allegedly happened. It smells like broken stone and scorched pine sap. Whether it was vengeance or simple bloodlust, Ares doesn't seem bothered. He tilts his head, squinting toward Olympus. He's already anticipating trouble. Because killing a demigod, that's one thing. Killing Poseidon's son, that's the celestial equivalent of punching your coworker's kid at an office picnic. The clouds overhead churn like boiling milk. You feel the tremble in your chest before the thunder hits. Something has been stirred. Olympus is listening now. And if you think gods handle internal HR disputes gracefully, I have several myths involving cannibalism, cursed jewelry, and swan impersonation to remind you otherwise. Ares sheathes his sword with a scoff and trudges up the slope toward his makeshift war camp. His armor drips ichor, not all of it Halorothios. You follow passing olive trees snapped in half and hoofprints burned into stone. Inside the tent, which is just a very dramatic open-air pavilion, made of black banners, and the smell of iron, Ares sits alone, sharpening his spear with the slow, deliberate strokes of someone who would rather be killing something else. Trial, he mutters under his breath. Zeus and his trials. You imagine this isn't the first time Ares has gotten into celestial hot water. After all, he once chained the winds to win a bet and tried to seduce Aphrodite while disguised as a mortal hoplite with absolutely no acting skills. This, compared to those moments, might actually be serious. A golden pigeon flutters in and drops a scroll with an embossed seal, Zeus's thunderbolt stamp. It's a summons. Ares doesn't open it. He knows what it says. Outside, the wind changes. In Greek tradition, the Areopagus, the hill you're on, later became the actual site for homicide trials in classical Athens. Ironically fitting. The myth claims this is the first time such a trial is held here in the shadow of the Acropolis. It's as if myth and law are about to shake hands for the very first time. Awkwardly, you wonder how this trial will go. Will the gods follow any known process? Is there an attorney figure, a jury? Will someone swear on the sticks and immediately regret it? Toirets. Nope. Not really. Greek gods aren't known for fairness. Justice is less blindfolded scales and more whatever Zeus had for breakfast that day. Historians still argue whether this myth reflects genuine shifts in Athenian legal philosophy, or was just another divine soap opera tacked on to explain the hill's future name. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, Ares is sharpening his weapon and muttering under his breath. You lean closer. He's practicing insults, hypocrites, cowardly goat lovers, petty thunder jockeys. He's ready for the courtroom. One curious detail: some old vase fragments show Halorothias not as a victim, but as a villain. In one account, he tries to violate Alcippe and Ares kills him in rage. In another, there's no motive given, just a god doing what gods do when bored and grumpy. Scholars bicker endlessly about this. Was it defense, revenge, preemptive, divine overkill? The truth, as always in mythology, is flexible. Above you, the sky starts to swirl gold and violet. You hear voices bickering, theatrical ones. The other gods are arriving. You'll want to stand back for this part. Hera arrives first, of course. Regal frost-eyed and already annoyed. She casts a glance at Ares, who is pretending very hard not to sulk. She says nothing. Their family therapy sessions must be intense. Hermes appears next in a gust of wind and sass, balancing a scroll and a goblet of something bubbly. He winks at you. You do not wink back. Then Poseidon crashes down in a wave of blue light. He's early, which is rare, and furious, which is constant. He says nothing yet, but the storm clouds now smell like wet seaweed. The courtroom is forming on the hill itself. Stone benches emerging from the ground, a half-circle arrangement that feels both sacred and dangerously petty. The gods take their seats, still grumbling about who gets to be foreperson. You're ushered to the edge by a shadowy figure who might be an eerie. She hands you a lemon drop and whispers, "It's about to get interesting." You pop the candy in your mouth and watch Ares step forward, his crimson cloak fluttering behind him. No fanfare, no apology, just a war god standing on trial. For once, not for what he did in battle, but for what he did when the fighting was supposed to be over. You've seen Ares in war mode, roaring, smashing, grinning maniacally as helmets fly through the air like bronze frisbees. But now he's standing before 12 of his immortal relatives in a glorified divine amphitheater, arms crossed, face unreadable, and just a hair's breadth away from muttering something that will get him zapped. He's not shackled, of course. You don't shackle gods. That's how you get volcanic eruptions and multi-century curses. But the golden lasso of procedural theatrics is wrapped loosely around him, a gesture of containment, more symbolic than functional. The gods love their pageantry. Ares, unsurprisingly, is unimpressed. Poseidon hasn't spoken yet, but his silence is thick. His trident is embedded in the ground next to him, humming faintly with ocean rage. Occasionally, it spits out a little foam. Probably not great. Ares glares at it, then looks up at Zeus, who is taking forever to finish his celestial snack, a shimmering cube of ambrosia, the size of a grapefruit. Zeus chews thoughtfully, as if pondering not only the fate of his son, but also whether this entire court thing was even worth the paperwork. It wasn't. Let's be clear. Ares begins, voice rough as sandpaper. I killed Halorotheus because he was about to defile my daughter. You lot would have done the same. Silence. Then Hera coughs one of those pointed, judgmental motherly coughs. Ares turns toward her, arms wide. Oh, do go on. Explain how this wasn't justified. You can feel the tension from where you're sitting. Ares isn't being defensive. He's being offensively bored, the same way a teenager is bored during a lecture on why setting the neighbor's lawn on fire was technically against the rules. Here's the thing, Ares has always been the family embarrassment. Not for his violence, that's expected, but for how unslick he is about it. Apollo hides cruelty in song. Athena buries it in strategy. Even Dionysus manages to make chaos look like performance art. But Ares, he's the guy who punches first, shrugs later, and doesn't clean up the mess. That's why this trial even exists. See, the Greeks didn't exactly love Ares. Unlike the Romans with Mars, they viewed him with suspicion. He represented the untamed part of war, the blood, the screaming, the irrational fire in your gut. And in this myth, he finally oversteps the weird, invisible line of acceptability. It's not that he killed someone. It's who he killed. Halorotheus, Poseidon's boy. And worse, he did it without asking first. My daughter screamed, Ares continues. I reacted. Would you have waited for committee approval that lands? Even Hera tilts her head considering. But then again, Greek gods are rarely moved by mortal concepts like fairness. They're political animals. And this is about image power and family grievances older than most civilizations. Historians still argue whether this myth marks an early attempt by the Athenians to show divine endorsement of their homicide court system. The Areopagus court, which would later try actual human murder cases, traces its mythical origins back to this very moment. It's a neat bit of origin storytelling, if by neat you mean completely chaotic and soaked in family drama. Ares shifts his weight, irritated. His armor clangs, echoing off the marble seats. This is ridiculous, he mutters. The gods murder mortals all the time. Hera turned a woman into a cow for being pretty. Apollo shot plague arrows at the Greeks for fun. But I kill a would-be rapist. And suddenly there are rules. He gestures toward Athena, who sits 3 rows above with her owl blinking smugly on her shoulder. She dropped a whole building on a priest once. Athena doesn't respond. She just raises one eyebrow. The universal symbol for, "You're not wrong, but shut up anyway." Then Ares scoffs. "Zeus, you threw Kronos into Tartarus. Poseidon, you drowned entire cities. And don't get me started on Artemis." She turned a guy into a stag for looking at her accidentally. Still silence. Finally, Ares drops his hands and laughs bitterly. But no, I'm the problem. That's when Hermes leans over and whispers something to Apollo, who chuckles quietly. Ares hears it. The war god's eyes narrow. Oh yes, let's all laugh at Ares the brute. Too dumb for philosophy, too blunt for subtlety. You glance around. No one seems inclined to argue. Even Demeter is leafing through a vine-wrapped scroll that definitely isn't related to this trial. There's a truth. No one's saying out loud Ares is useful in wartime, but unbearably embarrassing during peace. When the spears are down, his presence is like a smoke alarm that won't stop beeping. This trial isn't really about justice. It's about whether the gods can tolerate their own reflection in someone too honest about what they all are. There's a quiet rumble underfoot. Maybe thunder. Maybe Poseidon's temper. Maybe the Areopagus hill remembering that once upon a myth, blood soaked its soil. Ares straightens. "I would do it again," he says, eyes locked on Poseidon. "Your son was filth." Poseidon finally speaks one word. Careful. Oh boy. The temperature drops about 10 degrees. The seas far below the hill seem to surge in response. Ares, to his credit, or foolishness, doesn't blink. "Maybe you should have raised him better," he growls. That does it. Poseidon rises, trident sparking hair twisting like a wave in a storm. The gods begin murmuring, shifting in their seats. You clutch the armrest of your stone bench, wondering if this entire hill is about to be swallowed by a divine grudge match. But Zeus holds up a hand. A flash of light. A thunderous snap. Time hiccups slightly. Everyone freezes. Zeus speaks at last, his voice dry, with the exhaustion of parenting a million-year-old kindergarten. "This is a trial," he says, "not a duel. Sit." Poseidon does reluctantly. Ares snorts and leans back, arms crossed, expression smug in a way that makes you want to both cheer and facepalm. It's going to be a long day. You've heard the phrase, "Don't speak ill of the dead," but apparently no one told the gods. Because right now the divine courtroom is taking a long meandering detour into the character assassination of Haliroria. Theoichtadgadius. Poseid. Srini. Late questionably heroic, possibly sleazy son. You lean forward as Apollo unrolls a glowing scroll. He reads aloud in that obnoxiously clear-barred voice, the kind that always sounds like it's about to break into poetry. The scroll flickers with scenes Haliruthius bathing in rivers he wasn't invited to. Haliruthius picking fights with dryads. Haliruthius sneaking into temples with a flask of something suspicious. And then, what you've been waiting for. A flicker, an image, a frozen moment of mythic surveillance. A figure, Alcippe, daughter of Ares, standing on the sacred hill, wind in her hair. Startled expression on her face. Another figure, Haliruthius, emerging from the trees, moving quickly, arrogantly, like a man who doesn't think no is a word the gods take seriously. The image fades. You could hear a feather fall, if any of these gods had patience for feathers. According to some traditions, Apollo intones Haliruthius attempted to assault Alcippe. Ares caught him in the act and struck him down. The phrase hangs in the air, dry and sharp. Ares doesn't blink. His jaw tightens. You can practically hear the war drums thudding behind his eyes. But then Apollo clears his throat. Other versions he adds with a flourish of ambiguity say that Haliruthius was simply trespassing, that Ares leapt to conclusions, that perhaps the demigod was unarmed and the killing. He pauses dramatically. Excessive. Now it's Poseidon's turn to seize the stage. He stands again, but this time, he's calm. Too calm. His voice ripples like water just before a tidal wave. "My son," he says, "was flawed. But he was not a criminal. He was studying sacred springs. He was writing a hymn to the naiads." You try not to choke. Ares does. He laughs so hard it echoes down the hillside. A hymn, The only song that fool knew started with "How dare you ignore me" and ended with "I swear I'm royalty." Even Athena lets a corner of her mouth twitch. Poseidon predictably doesn't appreciate the commentary. He died without a trial. No chance to speak, no chance to explain. Ares shrugs. Some people don't deserve explanation. Some acts don't get courtrooms. You know that. And now we come to the tricky part, because you've read about this story before. And if you've taken a few courses or skimmed a myth anthology, you've seen the contradiction in one version. Halirrhothios is the villain. In another, he's simply another victim of Ares' legendary temper. Historians still argue whether this tale was designed to humanize Ares or justify a legal tradition. The Athenians liked to root their institutions in mythology. It gave their laws an air of divine inevitability. If even gods had trials, well, then surely mortals must obey the courts. But in practice, the gods seemed to be using this trial less to judge the truth, and more to toss around accusations like festive olives at a Dionysian brunch. Suddenly, Hera clears her throat. She rises stately and silent for a long beat before speaking. "I was there," she says quietly. "I heard Alcippe scream. You freeze." Ares glances up. His face doesn't change, but something in his posture shifts just a little straighter. Hera continues. "I was visiting the sacred grove below the hill. I heard the cry. I turned and saw Halirrhothios running from the stones." Ares appeared not long after. Poseidon looks at her stunned. "You never said," she raises a hand. "I am not saying he deserved death," she says. "But I am saying something happened." It's the closest thing Ares will get to a compliment from his mother. You can almost feel the gods collectively go, huh? But of course, that doesn't settle things. Not really. The divine court is less about facts and more about what serves Olympus. You notice a few of them shifting uneasily. Not out of compassion. Mind you, these gods aren't built for that. No, they're recalculating alliances, pondering optics, wondering what mortals will say if word leaks. Remember, in the ancient world, reputation mattered more than truth. Especially for the gods. Ares stares Hera down for a moment, then nods just once. It's not gratitude, more like acknowledgement. Like soldiers nodding after surviving the same bloody battlefield, even if they stood on opposite sides. Then something unexpected happens. A whisper, a sound like wind through old bones. It's coming from the shadows behind the court. You peer closer and realize what you're looking at. The Furies. The Erinyes. They're here, not officially, not invited, but watching. These are the goddesses of vengeance, older than Olympus, born from blood, and always hungry for punishment. Their presence here says one thing, clearly someone is guilty. The only question is who, and whether or not they'll be satisfied with a verdict. You sit back. Halirrhothios lies cold in myth. The hill remembers, the gods remember. But memory isn't justice, and justice in Olympus is flexible. You glance up as Ares folds his arms again, a smirk playing at the edge of his mouth. He knows what you know now. This isn't about guilt. It's about who gets to define the story. The courtroom isn't quiet anymore. There's a tension in the marble air that buzzes beneath your fingernails, like the whole place is charged with the divine equivalent of static clang. The gods are rustling in their seats, gold sandals scraping against celestial stones, shifting their posture, the way rich people do when a dinner party gets just uncomfortable enough to consider dessert. And then he enters. Zeus, in full judgment mode, now lifts a hand, and from behind a column wrapped in actual living grapevines comes a figure draped in sunlight and smugness. Apollo, god of logic, poetry, medicine, and turning courtroom trials into performance art. He doesn't walk. He glides. His chiton is wrinkle-free. His laurel wreath catches the light at an angle you suspect was very rehearsed, and in his hand, a scroll long enough to wrap around the moon 3 times and still leave room for musical notation. Esteemed deities of Olympus, Apollo begins with that sing-song baritone that makes you want to simultaneously take notes and roll your eyes. I come today not as a brother, not as a son, but as a representative of truth. Ares groans audibly. Zeus says nothing. His eyebrows rise half a centimeter. Apollo continues. We are here to decide whether the act committed on this sacred hill was justice or murder, passion or wrath, protection, or unprovoked violence. He spins dramatically facing Ares. You, brother, have long been our blade, but blades when left unchecked become wild, and wild blades cut the hand that wields them. You swear he practiced that in front of a mirror. Ares, still leaning against the pillar like a bored schoolboy, yawns. Did you write that last night, or are you recycling lines from your invented justice scroll? Apollo does not respond. He merely unrolls his enormous parchment and begins. First, he recounts the evidence, as much as you can have in a world where people regularly turn into birds, and back again. He reads testimonies from dryads who claimed Halorotheus was often aggressive. He cites a nymph's cryptic song from centuries ago. He even quotes a passing shepherd who once saw the demigod practice, swinging his sword at goats. You blink. Historians still argue whether this whole narrative was patched together after the fact to sanitize Ares' image, or to retroactively justify Athens' homicide court. But Apollo isn't citing history. He's citing narrative control. This is about who owns the story. And yet, Apollo continues flipping the scroll with an elegant wrist snap. Intent matters. Emotion matters. Even gods are not immune to the flaws of impulse. He stares Ares down now hard. Was this justice or vengeance? Ares tilts his head. Do you care? Apollo pauses. It's a good question. Because here's the secret no one admits: most of the gods don't. Justice is a performance up here. A lesson to mortals. A moral if you're lucky. A political favor if you're not. And Apollo is here to sell that performance. He lifts his arms. If we excuse unchecked violence even when justified, we erode the sanctity of divine restraint. Hermes snorts. Sanctity. From the guy who flayed a satyr for losing a music contest, Apollo doesn't flinch. That satyr insulted harmony. This is about law. The tension spikes. You feel it ripple across the stones. Ares straightens slightly, no longer quite so slouched. Law, he says. Or ego. Apollo flinches just a bit. But the moment is enough, because that's the knife's edge this trial walks. On one side, justice. On the other, godly pride dressed in legalese. You scan the others. Athena, lips pursed, eyes calculating. Demeter, rubbing a grain stalk between her fingers, saying nothing. Dionysus, sipping from a vine-wrapped goblet and whispering to his own shoulder. Artemis, deadly still, watching Ares like a hawk with a vendetta. Hera, unreadable. It's Zeus who finally breaks the silence. Enough, he says, his voice like a mountain clearing its throat. We will hear from the defense. Ares steps forward. He doesn't unroll anything. No scroll. No diagrams. No glowing visions of nymphs or satyrs or spectral reenactments. Just words. He looks at the gods not with reverence or submission, but like a man in an elevator forced to ride with his entire dysfunctional extended family for the duration of eternity. I killed Halorotheus, he says. I don't deny it. He lets that settle. He came for my daughter. I stopped him. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't wait for debate. I didn't call a meeting or quote Homer. He walks slowly, his footsteps heavy on the stone. You can almost feel the tremor in the hill memory or metaphor. Who knows, I've watched all of you punish mortals for pettier crimes. I've seen you strike down lovers, burn forests, flood islands. And yet here I stand, put on trial for protecting blood. He looks at Zeus. You've done worse. He looks at Athena. You've killed smarter. He looks at Hera. You've cursed more cruelly. The courtroom is dead silent now. Even Dionysus has stopped giggling. Ares finishes. So, punish me. Or don't. But don't pretend this is about justice. You're not sure if it's wisdom or defiance, but it's probably the most honest thing said all day. Apollo looks down at his scroll, frowns, folds it back up, neat and silent. And you little mortal observer perched on the edge of divine theatrics realize this isn't going to be a trial. It's going to be a reckoning. You would think after that mic drop of a speech from Ares, the courtroom would simmer down. Maybe take a moment for some divine reflection. But no, that's not how Olympus works. Because now Hera rises slowly, deliberately, and the temperature drops like someone opened a freezer door behind your spine. She doesn't glide like Apollo or stomp like Ares. She floats, quietly, elegantly, like a blade concealed in silk. You feel the courtroom hold its breath. She stands in the center rope, cascading like a waterfall, made of snow and grudges. She surveys the gathered immortals, then fixes her gaze on Ares, her own son, mind you, with the kind of look only a queen, a mother and a being older than most mountain ranges can manage. And then she speaks. Her voice, soft, steady, razor sharp. There are many ways to be a god, she begins. Some rule with wisdom, some with law, some with love. And then there is war. Ares doesn't flinch, but you can feel his jaw working slightly. Hera's tone doesn't waver. My son has always been blunt, impulsive, crude, and often correct in ways that make everyone uncomfortable. She pauses, letting that hang. You're starting to sweat. He is not, as many say, without honor, but he is without polish. Somewhere in the back, Hermes lets out a cough that is definitely a laugh. Dionysus chokes slightly on his wine. Hera ignores them. I am not here to excuse him, she continues, but I will remind this court of what he is: a hammer. And hammers do not deliberate. They react. You hear that phrase ripple across the courtroom: hammer. React. It's the kind of line mortals would carve into marble. Hera turns towards Zeus. You made him that way. There's a flicker. Was that discomfort on Zeus's face? Hard to say. Might have just been indigestion. My son has flaws, Hera says, looking now at Poseidon. But if your son was innocent, then why did he flee the moment Ares appeared? Poseidon's knuckles tighten on his trident. Hera doesn't care. I heard her scream, she repeats, quieter now. And that scream was not confusion. It was terror. The courtroom is silent again. And then, with no flair, no bow, no signature flourish, Hera steps back and retakes her seat. The air fills back in around her as if a pressure system just passed through. You blink. Did Hera just support Ares? Sort of. It's complicated. See, Hera's loyalty isn't easily won. Even her children don't get a pass by default. Ares has disappointed her more times than you can count, raging off to wars he didn't need to start losing to Athena, in front of entire cities falling for Aphrodite, like a lovesick gladiator with no helmet. But this was different. This wasn't about strategy, or ego, or seduction. This was instinct. Ares did something terrible, for a reason that wasn't entirely selfish, and maybe, just maybe, that cracked open the icy door of Hera's respect, or pity, or something harder to name. Historians still argue whether this moment in the myth is meant to humanize Hera, or if it's simply another example of how myth bends to explain cultural shifts. After all, by the time the myth of this trial solidifies, Athens has already turned the Areopagus into a homicide court. And what better way to lend credibility than by implying that even the gods have to explain themselves there? But in this courtroom right now, myth isn't metaphor. It's just family. You glance back at Ares. He's still leaning against the pillar, but his expression is different. Still unreadable, but maybe a little less combative. Or maybe that's just the flickering torchlight playing tricks. Then you hear a faint tisk, like someone brushing dust from marble. Athena. She shifts in her seat. And you get the sense the courtroom's about to get colder. Because if Hera is ice, Athena is stone. She stands not slowly, not theatrically, but with absolute mechanical efficiency. She doesn't float. She steps. Her armor doesn't clang. It rings like temple bells marking the hour of reckoning. She stops just shy of the center and looks out, not at Ares, not at the gods, but straight ahead. I will not speak to feelings, she begins. I will speak to patterns. Oh boy, Athena's style isn't fiery. It's forensic, the kind of voice that could scold a volcano into submission. This is not the first time Ares has acted without thought. It will not be the last. This court must decide whether we permit that pattern to continue unchecked. Ares opens his mouth, maybe to snark, maybe to scoff, but Athena doesn't let him. This is not about justification. It is about precedent. You can practically hear lawyers in the mortal world shivering in admiration. She turns, now finally, to Ares. You are not evil, but you are dangerous. You are necessary, but not admirable. The words fall like polished daggers. I believe Halorotheus was likely guilty, she adds to Poseidon's visible disgust. But I also believe that Ares does not understand restraint. And that is a liability. The courtroom shifts. Because here's the thing, Athena isn't emotional. She doesn't care about Ares' personality. She's not here to shame him. She's here to optimize Olympus. And to her, Ares is a bad variable in a very carefully calculated equation. She steps back, no ceremony, no bow. And you feel the courtroom turn again. Ares is still standing, still silent, still radiating that low, quiet fury. But the tide just tilted against him, not because they hate him, but because they're afraid of what he might do next. There's a silence now, not the soft, reflective kind. No, this is the silence of a lightning bolt waiting tense, expectant, fizzing just beneath the clouds. Ares doesn't move. He's not one for rebuttals wrapped in logic. He isn't sharpening metaphors. He's sharpening real things, things that pierce. But you can feel it, he wants to speak. He just knows that doing so would probably make everything worse. So instead, he does what Ares does best. He rolls his eyes, loudly, magnificently, with the heavy sigh of a god who's been asked to explain why he smashed the pottery again. Oh, please, he grunts loud enough for the whole amphitheater to hear. The lot of you act like restraint is some kind of divine virtue, like you've never thrown a tantrum and flattened a town. The gods rustle again, like pigeons, disturbed on a marble roof. Ares steps forward. You want restraint? Fine, but don't pretend you invented morality. We all know where we come from. He gestures broadly up the slopes of Olympus. Chaos, titans, violence. I just never learned how to pretend I was better than all that. Poseidon growls. Zeus raises one warning brow, but Ares keeps going, warming to the topic. Let's not forget how many of us were born from violence. Athena, you sprang from a headache. Hermes stole cattle on day one. Dionysus, your entire existence is a wine-fueled paradox. And Apollo. Well, how many lovers did you forget to call back? Apollo winces. Dionysus grins. Ares turns now slow and deliberate to face the entire jury. I'm not saying I am innocent. I'm saying I'm consistent. You feel that in your teeth. Now, in any mortal court, that might be a strange defense. But here among immortals whose every feud is carved into the constellations, it has a certain undeniable appeal. And it lands. Oh, it lands. Because the truth is, Ares may be messy. He may be brutal, unpredictable, blunt as a warhammer in a pottery shop, but he's honest. He doesn't sugarcoat his divine function. He exists to fight, to rage, to let loose the storm that everyone else pretends isn't coming. He is what happens when the masks come off. Look. Ares continues, and for a moment, just a moment, he softens like a thundercloud receding just far enough to let through a single ray of gold. I didn't plan to kill Halorotheus. I didn't track him. I didn't stalk him across mortal lands. I reacted. I heard a scream. I saw him, and I struck. He clenches a fist. Would I do it again? Yes, every time. There's a pause, and then gods help us. Hermes raises a hand. You brace yourself. Permission to snark Lord Zeus, he asks with a grin that could sell bootleg lightning bolts to Tartarus. Zeus, clearly already regretting most of his children, gestures tiredly. Fine. Hermes bounds forward with the energy of a golden retriever and the verbal grace of a stand-up comic who moonlights as a psycho-pomp. Listen, I get it. I mean, who among us hasn't lashed out in a fit of divine parental protectiveness? I once cursed a guy for naming his goat Hermie. Wasn't even a good goat. But still, insulting. No one laughs. Hermes grins wider. But he says, glancing toward Ares, you do get that your vibe is, not helping your case, right? Ares glares. Hermes presses on. I mean, look at you. You've got convict energy. You walk like you've already been sentenced and you're planning the prison break. That gets a chuckle. Even Zeus lets out the tiniest wheeze of reluctant amusement. But seriously. Hermes continues now, a little softer. You're not wrong about the hypocrisy. We've all crossed lines. Do we want to admit it? No. But it's there. Then he looks around, gesturing broadly. So maybe this trial isn't about whether Ares did something wrong. Maybe it's about whether we're finally ready to admit we all play by different rules when it suits us. The gods murmur. And for a moment, you wonder, could Hermes be the one to sway them? Then Ares, ever helpful, mutters. Didn't you once sell a baby for a liar? Allegedly, Hermes shoots back. Still, the atmosphere has changed. Slightly. Zeus leans back. He doesn't look pleased, but he looks interested. And that's saying something. Hera is unreadable. Athena is still cold. Poseidon's trident is now bubbling at the base like an angry tea kettle. And yet, something in the courtroom has loosened. Ares, to his credit, doesn't press further. He steps back. He's said his piece. And whether it condemns or saves him, he's not apologizing. Because that's the thing about Ares. He doesn't fake remorse. And in this strange, pride-soaked, ego-choked divine chamber, that might just be the most honest thing anyone has done all day, you can almost hear the emotional tectonic plates grinding beneath Olympus now. Because next with the race on Dawars, grace of a glacier preparing to crush a village, Hera nods slightly toward the next speaker, her daughter, the goddess of strategy and cities and all things efficient Athena. Again, no, she's done. But the figure who rises isn't someone you expected to speak. Not so soon. Not here. Alcippe, the daughter, the girl at the center of the scream. She's not technically part of the court. No seat, no scroll, no vote, but when a voice from the heart of the storm rises, even gods go quiet. She walks forward tall, calm. Her movements sharp-edged and clean like her mother's blade, and her father's temper distilled into one still form. No armor, no crown, just a quiet gravity that makes you straighten in your seat. I'm not here to defend my father, she says. Every deity leans in just a little. I'm here because I was there. And I remember. She doesn't raise her voice, doesn't need to. Even Dionysus has stopped slouching. His wine goblet hovers in mid-air, forgotten. I was on the hill, she says. I felt the ground under my feet. I smelled pine and olive and sweat. I heard footsteps behind me that didn't belong. You hold your breath, and then 5 words that snap through the courtroom like a bolt from Athena herself. He didn't say my name. Poseidon visibly shifts. Alcippe continues, eyes steady. He didn't announce himself. He didn't speak. He grabbed. The word hits like a thunderclap, somehow louder, for being so quiet. And then my father came. She turns her gaze now not toward Zeus or Poseidon, or even the jury of glittering immortals, but toward the shadows, toward where the Erinyes still linger, like smoke at the corners of the trial. I know what justice feels like, she says. It's not elegant. It's not calm. It doesn't come with scrolls and speeches. She lifts her chin. It comes like a storm. You feel it again, that tremor in the stone beneath your seat, like the earth itself acknowledges her words. Did my father act in fury? Yes, but sometimes fury is all that stands between harm and healing. It's not a defense, not a plea. It's a statement. She bows her head, not to Zeus, but to the hill, to the memory, to the scream. And then, without waiting for permission, she walks back into the shadows. You don't see where she goes. You just feel the absence when she leaves, like a campfire suddenly snuffed. Poseidon stands. His eyes, for once, do not flash. I grieve my son, he says. He was not perfect. He was bold, proud, entitled, but he was mine. His voice cracks just slightly. It's like hearing the sea break apart. I don't pretend he was innocent, but I do not believe he deserved death without trial, not even from a god. He grips his trident harder. You see his knuckles turn seafoam white. I do not forgive. He sits, and the silence that follows is not peaceful. It's poisonous. This, you realize, is the fracture that matters. Not between Ares and Athena, not between gods and mortals, but between Ares and Poseidon. 2 pillars of Olympus now cracked. One from grief, one from guiltless fury. The courtroom breathes as if afraid to inhale too deeply. And then someone you really weren't expecting to speak clears his throat. Hephaestus. Yes, that Hephaestus. God of forge fire quiet rooms filled with gears and disappointment. A god usually ignored unless someone's weapon breaks, or a divine hot tub needs repairs. He rises with effort, his leg dragging slightly, the limp not masked by magic. He walks toward the circle's edge slowly. The gods watch uncertain. He rarely speaks at court. He clears his throat again. I remember, he says, when I was thrown from Olympus. You blink. That's not related. I remember what it felt like, he continues. To fall. To land. To break. The gods shift. I remember who caught me. And now, every eye mortal and divine snaps to Ares. Wait, what? You didn't know this? But apparently, neither did some of the gods. Hephaestus nods almost shyly. My brother. He caught me. Ares stares unblinking. He wasn't gentle, Hephaestus admits. But he didn't let me hit the ground alone. The forge god looks around uncomfortable under all the attention. I've spent centuries building things, trying to fix things. But some things only stop breaking when someone stands in the way. He turns back toward Ares. Thank you, he says simply. Ares blinks. Once, no quip, no eye roll, just a faint lowering of his shoulders. You can feel the tide shift again. This trial isn't about rules. It never was. It's about whether a god dod on upon bowed like Corridor on our Ares can be more than what he was made to be, or whether Olympus will keep punishing him for refusing to lie about it. The atmosphere changes after Hephaestus speaks. Not dramatically, not like a thunderclap or a divine bolt cracking the sky. It's subtler, like the first breeze before a storm finally lifts. Like the smell of iron fading into something more human. You look at Ares and for the first time since this began, he's not performing. He's not scowling or posturing or bracing for the next insult. He's just standing there, shoulders lowered, brow, not furrowed in anger, but something closer to fatigue. The gods are watching him differently now too. Not with pity, Olympians don't do pity, but with something more like reassessment. Like they're realizing the weapon might have a voice after all. But don't get too comfortable, because now Athena rises again. No speeches this time, no scrolls, just a simple sentence. We should begin deliberation. There's a murmur of agreement. And then, because Olympus is nothing if not bureaucratic beneath all the glowing skin and cosmic drama, Zeus waves a hand and the 12 divine jurors file into the sacred grove that serves as a celestial deliberation chamber. They disappear behind silvery branches that sway like the fabric of space. The leaves don't rustle, they hum. You're not allowed to follow, but you wouldn't want to, honestly. That much divine logic in one room might give you nosebleeds. Which leaves the rest of you in the courtroom awkwardly waiting. You glance around. Hermes is juggling a lightning bolt like a baseball. Dionysus has laid down across 3 chairs, snoring lightly, his empty goblet somehow refilling itself. Artemis, ever the hunter, is watching shadows, as if Halorothias' ghost might show up and try something dumb. Ares remains rooted. Then another unexpected twist. Demeter stands. If Athena is the mind of Olympus, and Ares is its rage, then Demeter is its gut deep, slow, old as fields in grief. You don't expect her to speak. She often doesn't. When you're the one who taught mortals to plant grain and mourn daughters, there's not much left to prove. But now she walks slow and barefoot into the center of the amphitheater. Her robes are the color of old barley. There's earth on her hands, not symbolic earth, actual dirt. She doesn't look at Ares. She looks at the hill. This land remembers blood, she says. The courtroom falls still. This hill, she continues, has heard cries like Alcipe's before. From mortals, from demigods, from others. You shift uneasily. You didn't know that. Demeter kneels, places one hand flat on the stone. The earth does not care for law. It cares for consequence. The words settle like silt. Then she rises and faces Poseidon. Your son may have died unjustly, but you cannot demand justice and refuse to name his sin. Poseidon stiffens. You would accuse him based on one scream. Demeter shakes her head. I accuse no one. I simply listen. There's something unsettling about the way she says that, like she's been listening for thousands of years. Maybe longer. Demeter walks back to her seat. As she passes Ares, she pauses briefly and says, You are not wheat. You do not bend. You break. That has always been your flaw. Ares blinks. But broken things can still protect the harvest, she adds. And then she's gone, swallowed by shadows and silent stone. You sit there, heart thudding softly, unsure what you're feeling. Is this sympathy? Understanding? Confusion? The gods all sit quietly now. Even Dionysus stirs. And then, out of nowhere, a laugh echoes. Not mocking, not cruel, just tired. Aries. He's chuckling. Low and dry. You all think this is new, he says half to himself. That this is some great turning point. A test. A lesson. He shakes his head. It's not. This is just Olympus doing what Olympus always does. It waits until someone bleeds, and then it writes a rulebook afterward. You don't disagree. Because really, how many myths are just post-game press conferences dressed up in drama? Aries looks around now, voice steady. None of you would have saved her faster than I did. Silence. But all of you, he says, would have cleaned it up prettier. And with that, he sits. You lean back, mind buzzing. No verdict yet, but the shape of this trial is changing. It's less about whether Ares should have killed Halorotheus, and more about whether Olympus is willing to admit the truth. That sometimes justice isn't clean. That sometimes rage isn't the opposite of righteousness. That sometimes war doesn't wait for a judge. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most terrifying part. Poseidon hasn't moved in several minutes, but you can feel him preparing, coiling, like a storm surge held back by the sheer force of divine diplomacy. And then, he stands. Oh boy. He doesn't speak at first, just lifts his trident. The courtroom dims slightly as though someone pulled clouds across the sun. His voice, when it comes, is like the ocean cracking against cliffside, slow rolling and impossible to ignore. Let us not pretend Poseidon says that I come to this court seeking vengeance. He pauses as if daring anyone to call him a liar. I come seeking balance. Ares smirks. Same thing when you say it. Poseidon ignores him. My son may have been flawed, he continues, but he was mine. His life, however small in your divine eyes, still mattered. You notice that a few lesser gods lower their gazes. Even the amphitheater seems to creak under the weight of Poseidon's grief. I know what it is to be overlooked, he adds. I ruled the seas while you all played on mountaintops. I raised islands from nothing while your temples drank gold and smoke. And still, you act surprised when I demand to be heard. And now the courtroom leans back. Because this isn't just about Halorotheus anymore. It's about Poseidon. About every slight. Every time he was passed over. Every thunderbolt hurled without consultation. Every moment Zeus ruled from the clouds and left the tides to churn unattended. I lost a son, Poseidon growls. And this time there is a shudder. And none of you came to mourn him. You glance toward Hera. She remains frozen, Athena stone-faced. Zeus drums his fingers against the armrest of his throne. Instead, Poseidon continues, voice rising like a tide. You sat and waited for this farce of a trial. You watched me, god of oceans, Timur of storms, sit quietly as you debated whether the death of my blood was an administrative oversight. There's foam now, real foam dripping from the grooves of his trident. A small pool is forming at his feet. And then comes the moment everyone has been dreading. Justice, Poseidon hisses, is not a verdict. It is an answer. And if I don't get one from this court, he doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't need to. The threat is obvious. If Olympus won't give him peace, the sea will take it. Historically, this is the part where everything floods. You glance up expecting thunder, but Zeus does not rise. Instead, he lets Poseidon's words hang there, salty and bitter as old shipwrecks. And then, because apparently things can always get more theatrical, Artemis rises. The goddess of the hunt, of chastity, of wild places. She walks with precision, her silver bow slung across her back, a quiet contrast to Poseidon's roaring storm. She speaks softly, but the sharpness in her tone cuts straight through the fog Poseidon left behind. I have heard enough myth dressed up as motive. You blink. Whoa. She doesn't wait for permission. She walks a slow arc around the center of the amphitheater, speaking as she moves. I do not care for courtroom riddles. I do not have patience for gods who pretend they were not born from blood. She stops directly between Ares and Poseidon. I care for one thing, she says. Intent. Now she looks at Ares. Did you see what Halorotheus intended? Ares doesn't blink. Yes. Did he know you were coming? No. Artemis nods once, then looks to Poseidon. And did you know what your son had become? Poseidon scowls. He was proud, arrogant. He was learning. Learning what she asks, and for a moment the amphitheater is silent. Poseidon doesn't answer. She turns again now to the other gods. I am not one for mercy, but I am also not one for theater. This case is not about whether a death occurred. She draws an arrow, not to knock it just to show it. It is about whether that arrow was aimed or necessary. She walks slowly back to her seat. Sometimes she adds almost to herself, you shoot to protect. Sometimes you wait, and something worse happens. The bow disappears. Ares, for the first time, looks almost thoughtful. And that's when it hits you. The gods in all their power aren't immune to doubt. Not even Artemis. This isn't some high fantasy showdown with perfect heroes and cackling villains. This is something messier. A murder. A family torn between love and law. A society of immortals pretending their emotions don't shape everything they do. Historians still debate whether Artemis's testimony was intended to mirror evolving Athenian ideas about justice. Whether force could ever be preventative, not punitive. But here in this charged divine space, her words have weight. More than Athena's logic. More than Apollo's poetry. Because Artemis doesn't speak to reason. She speaks to instinct. And somehow everyone listens. Even Poseidon. Even Ares. Even you. The sea still seethes, but for now it does not rise. You would think after Artemis's elegant dissection of divine morality, the court would simmer, maybe even start leaning toward a verdict. You'd be wrong. Because now it's time for the part of every trial where things stop being rational and start getting theatrical. And that means cross-examination. And who better to kick off this most chaotic segment of godly jurisprudence than Artemis herself? She doesn't do it with flair. No scrolls, no gavel, no glowing-eyed declarations. She just stands, points at Ares, and says plainly, "Sit." He does. Wait. Ares actually obeys. Artemis steps into the center of the amphitheater again. Her bow has vanished, but her voice is like an arrow. She paces slowly like a wolf in the snow. "You said you heard her scream." She begins. "What kind of scream?" Ares tilts his head. "A scream that made me draw blood." "Was it fear?" "Yes." "Was it pain?" "Yes." "Was it your daughter?" "Yes." 3 questions, 3 answers. No hesitation. "Did you speak to Halorotheus?" "No." "Did you ask him what he was doing?" "No." "Did you try to stop him without killing him?" Pause. "No." Artemis circles him, silent for a beat, then stops directly behind him. "Would you if it happened again?" And now Ares hesitates. "I don't know." There it is, the crux of the matter, and the only thing no one here is comfortable saying out loud. Because Ares isn't a planner. He's not a tactician. He's not like Athena or even Artemis herself. He's not calculating 6 moves ahead. He is the 6th move. He is the hammer falling before the logic clicks into place. Artemis doesn't look pleased, but she doesn't strike either. She simply says, "Thank you," with a crisp nod, and returns to her seat. But the room isn't done. Because now the gods are murmuring. The whispers swell like cicadas in high summer. Did he act too fast? Could he have stopped it another way? Was it justice or just reflex? Then just when you think it might calm down again, another figure stands. And this time the room does groan. Dionysus. Oh yes. He stumbles forward, his wine goblet in one hand, a peacock feather tucked inexplicably into his hair. His robe is halfway off one shoulder and one sandal is on the wrong foot. But don't be fooled, this is all part of the act. "Friends," he begins, arms spread. "Romans, wait, wrong mythology gods. Countrymen, lend me your ears." Ares groans. "Dionysus." The wine god grins unbothered. I know I'm late. I was having a moment with a sycamore tree. Everyone pretends not to ask. But I couldn't let this little divine drama play out without dropping a few fermented truths. He spins, nearly falls, rights himself. Justice, he says, is a performance. That catches attention. You lean forward. Think about it. Dionysus continues. Trials, ceremonies, testimonies, all just acts. Morality in costumes, law wrapped in choreography. He takes a drink. And this, he gestures wildly at the gods, is the best play I've seen in centuries. Hermes applauds politely. But Dionysus says, now a touch more serious, "If you ask me whether Ares should be punished," he turns to Ares. "I say no." Gasps. "Not quite." But definitely some raised eyebrows. Not because he's innocent, Dionysus adds, but because he was true to what he is. He takes another sip, and isn't that what we all want to be? Honest, even if it's ugly. You're surprised. That's coherent, strangely wise. Maybe that's the trick with Dionysus. Madness and clarity share a wine glass, and occasionally one gets drunk and tells the truth. He finishes his drink and winks. Besides, you can't put chaos on trial. You can only dance with it. And with that, he sits on the floor, obviously, and begins humming an ancient hymn no one else remembers. The courtroom breathes again. Ares hasn't spoken since Artemis. He sits still, unmoving, absorbing each blow, each defense, each contradiction. But the look in his eyes has changed. It's no longer fire. It's waiting. Because he knows what comes next. The votes. But not yet. One more twist. From the edge of the divine circle, something stirs. A whisper. A movement in the marble. And then, a figure steps out. Not a god. Not exactly. But older. The Erinyes. The Furies. Remember them, the avengers of spilled blood. The ancient sisters of vengeance, who aren't bound by Olympus or protocol, or even Zeus' decree. They never asked for permission to speak. And they don't now. One steps forward, tall, robed in shadows and sorrow hair, hissing faintly like wind through bone reeds. She doesn't look at Zeus. She doesn't look at Ares. She looks at you. And then she says, "We are listening." And that somehow is the most terrifying thing anyone has said all day. The moment the Erinyes speak, the courtroom changes. It's not a matter of noise or light. It's deeper. Like the marrow of Olympus suddenly remembers its mortal adjacent. Like the roots of justice, not the kind that comes with shiny helmets and scrolls, but the kind carved into stone by grief and rage, just opened their eyes. The lead fury stands unmoving. She's tall, impossibly still draped in what looks like funeral smoke woven into fabric. Her voice is soft, but the air listens when she talks. "We are listening," she repeats. No one dares interrupt. Not even Zeus. You've probably heard myths where the Furies show up to torment murderers, to whisper guilt into the ears of killers until they crack and confess. But here they're calm, controlled, clinical almost. The lead Fury lifts one finger. A god has killed. A demigod lies in the earth, and Olympus debates whether this was impulse or intention. Her eyes fall on Ares. You are blood's messenger, but are you also blood's judge? Ares remarkably does not speak. Not out of fear. You suspect he doesn't scare easily, but something else. Respect, maybe. The Furies are ancient, older than even the Titans. They don't belong to Olympus. They watch Olympus. Another Fury, this one with eyes like cracked obsidian, steps forward. The scream of a daughter, she says, carries truth. But truth is not always justice. Her voice is like dry leaves over bone. And justice, she adds, turning toward Poseidon now, is not always peace. Poseidon meets her gaze. And this is something you don't see often, Poseidon, god of earthquakes, swallowing. The muscles in his jaw shift. His trident sinks half an inch into the floor. The third Fury speaks last. She doesn't look at anyone. There will always be those who strike too late. There will always be those who strike too soon. Then she looks at the ground. We do not ask what happened. We felt what happened. Now that is new. You suddenly wonder what that means. Felt. Are they empathic? Are they divine memory incarnate? Do they store screams? The lead Fury steps forward again. You notice she does not cast a shadow. Or maybe it's that the whole amphitheater is now her shadow. We will not cast judgment, she says. But we will say this: if this act is forgiven, then Olympus must remember what it is choosing. And then the line that echoes into your spine. If you let rage define right, rage will come knocking again. With that, the three Furies vanish. No poof, no glittery exit. One moment they're there, the next, the air feels lighter. But not better, just emptier. You glance around. Every god has that look now the one mortals get when they leave a funeral, unsure if the person they buried was entirely dead. Even Dionysus is quiet. And then, finally, Zeus stands. He doesn't speak right away. He just stares up into the sky above the Areopagus as if hoping for some celestial intern to whisper the answer down from the clouds. None comes. Let the jury withdraw, he says. The divine jurors, the inner circle of Olympus, the 12 who've been assigned the heavy task of verdict, rise. They file once more into the silver-lit grove, and the vines close behind them, like curtains. Now the waiting begins, and with it, the squirming. Hermes starts pacing, muttering something about odds and public perception. Apollo leans against a column and rereads his own scroll, probably just to admire the penmanship. Hephaestus begins fiddling with a tiny gear from a pocket in his cloak. Something about stress-calming mechanisms. Ares stands, arms crossed, eyes closed, still. You wonder what's running through his mind. Not guilt. That much seems certain. Maybe frustration, maybe boredom, maybe a kind of old ache, one you'd never guess existed in someone made of war and noise. He doesn't look angry now. He looks alone. And that's when you realize Ares might win this trial. He might walk out with divine forgiveness stamped on his forehead and legal myth status cemented forever. But even if he wins, he still loses something. Because the trial exposed him, it forced Olympus to see him as something other than a weapon. And for gods like Ares, being seen is far more dangerous than being hated. Historians still argue whether this myth was ever really about justice at all. Some say it was a coded parable for unchecked masculinity. Others claim it legitimized the court of the Areopagus by placing it in divine hands. Some fringe theories even propose it was an allegory for a suppressed political scandal in early Athens. But standing here now, you don't feel like you're in a metaphor. You feel like you're watching someone wrestle with the unbearable weight of being exactly what they were made to be, and realizing that might not be enough anymore. The vines part. The jurors return. No one breathes, not even the gods. And Ares, still standing, still waiting. The jurors emerge like shadows at dawn, still solemn, their expressions tightly composed in that practiced way that says, "We definitely argued for a while." They take their seats one by one. Athena first, face unreadable. Hermes' hair slightly askew, probably from trying to lighten the mood and being promptly ignored. Apollo with his scroll now tightly rolled fingers, tapping it like a drum. Demeter arms crossed. Artemis still and pale as ever. Even Dionysus seems a shade more sober. Zeus stands at the center. His voice booms, not angry, not dramatic. Just final. "Have you reached your verdict?" Athena nods once. "We have." You feel your stomach tighten, even as an observer, even as a mortal ghost trailing the gods. You feel it. Because this moment, it matters. It will ripple through myths. It will land in Athenian courts centuries later disguised as tradition. It will travel across tablets, scrolls, frescoes, whispered in temple shadows. Athena rises to speak, not as strategist now, but as oracle. In the matter of Ares, she begins on the charge of divine murder. "We find him." But before she can finish, Hermes interrupts. "Wait," he blurts. Half standing, "Shouldn't we?" Hermes. Zeus growls. Hermes sits down. Athena sighs through her nose. "As I was saying, we find him." But then Dionysus raises a hand. "Can we just do a show of hands? I feel like this deserves some flair." Ares groans loudly. Athena turns slowly with the gaze of a woman who has calculated 18 ways to end a person's existence without lifting a finger. Dionysus retracts his hand. "Never mind. Proceed." Athena lifts her chin and finishes not guilty. The words echo like a clean sword slice through marble. Zeus says nothing. Not yet. The gods murmur, but there are no cheers. No dramatic gasps. Just a wave of silence folding into the next. Ares exhales. Not relief. Not triumph. Just air. Like he's been holding something since the scream. But Zeus isn't done. "We do not declare you innocent," he says to Ares. "We declare that the act in context does not warrant punishment." Ares nods once. Poseidon stone-faced. He says nothing, but you feel the tension roll off him like surf after a storm. His trident pulses blue at his side. He looks not at Ares, not at Zeus, not at Alcippe, just forward. Into the distance, past the hill, past the gods, to a sun no longer walking the world. Athena adds a clause because of course she does. This decision is not precedent. It is singular. It does not imply endorsement of reactionary violence. Ares rolls his eyes again. Athena ignores him. Artemis offers one last arrow of logic. "Let it be recorded that this verdict rests on intent and not preference." Dionysus mutters, "Let it be recorded that I'm starving." And with that, the court dissolves. Not all at once. First, Hermes vanishes in a puff of sandal dust. Then, Apollo fades into golden mist, probably off to write an epic poem and overpolish it. Artemis walks away without fanfare, bow slung again across her back. Hephaestus returns to his forge, gears already ticking in his hands. Even Hera exits with the quiet dignity of a storm withdrawing from shore. Poseidon stands last. He looks at Ares. No words. Just a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. Then he's gone pulled into the scent of salt and distant thunder. Zeus turns to Ares. We are not done, you and I. Ares tilts his head. We never are. Zeus doesn't argue. He lifts his hand, and in a blink, the amphitheater vanishes. The only thing left is the hill, the Areopagus, empty now, save for you and the god of war. He stands alone in the fading light. The sun casts him in red and bronze. He looks out across Athens, the flicker of torches, the distant hum of mortals who will one day build courthouses on this soil. You step beside him, if only metaphorically. He doesn't look at you, but you sense he knows you're there. You think I wanted this? He says, voice low. To be judged by gods who kill for fun, you don't answer. He laughs just once. They said I was a weapon. But I'm not. Weapons don't choose. He clenches a fist. I did. Then slowly he turns toward the slope where Alcip once screamed and the world tilted just enough for Olympus to care. She doesn't speak of it, he says. But I remember. So she doesn't have to. You look down the hill. There's no blood, no scorch marks. Nothing remains of Halorothias, not even a whisper. But Ares remembers. And maybe that's punishment enough. You begin to leave your steps light the air cooler now. Behind you, Ares stands still. Not a god in glory. Just a father. Just a soldier. Just something more complicated than either. And above him, the stars begin to shimmer. The kind of night sky that only comes after storms pass and verdicts are spoken. You don't get far before something curious tugs at your senses. A low vibration underfoot, as if the very stones of the Areopagus want to say one last thing. And so, despite yourself, you linger. You glance back, expecting Ares to be gone, vanished in a trail of smoke and iron. But he's still there, Anton still motionless, still staring down the hill, lost in thoughts no myth has written. Then from the olive groves below, a new figure arrives. She doesn't walk. She glides not in the divine glowing way that Apollo or Hera might, but with the deliberate silence of someone who is never quite part of Olympus, even when she was born into it. Nemesis. Yes, that Nemesis. The goddess of retribution, divine balance. The one even gods hesitate to invoke by name too loudly. The sound around her fades. Birds stop singing cicadas. Pause, mid-chirp. Even the air seems to press against itself, unsure what to do with her presence. She says nothing at first. She walks a slow arc around the spot where the trial took place. Her hand traces the stone fingers, brushing lightly over the weather-worn marble, as if reading invisible inscriptions. And then she speaks not to you, not to Ares, but to the hill. Balance must be seen, not just spoken. You're not entirely sure what that means. But then again, Nemesis doesn't deal in clarity. She deals in inevitability. Ares finally turns to face her. He doesn't speak, but the weight in his eyes says everything. They stare at each other, two beings made of reaction. One born of wrath, the other of reckoning. Nemesis nods slowly. You defended your daughter. Ares answers with a slight twitch of the jaw. Yes, you acted without trial. Also yes, and now Olympus has offered you peace. A pause. Ares scoffs not angrily, but bitterly. Olympus never offers peace. Just delay. Nemesis smiles, but it isn't warm. No, it offers memory. And then she steps aside and gestures to the ground. You hadn't noticed it before, but etched into the very stone there's a new groove. A fresh mark. Barely there, but there. A single line cut deep. Not a name. Not a symbol. Just a scar. A reminder. Because that's what gods leave behind, not bodies. Not graves. But marks. Nemesis continues walking, vanishing into the groves the way smoke disappears into air without sound, without farewell. Ares watches her go. Then, without drama or flourish, he crouches near the scar and traces it with one gauntleted finger. He doesn't speak. But you understand. It's not a victory. It's not a loss. It's memory. And memory for someone like Ares is harder to bear than war. Eventually he rises, turns his back on the hill, and begins the slow descent. And that's when you notice something else. Mortals. They're gathering just a few just locals. A priest, a farmer, a curious youth. They've heard whispers. Gods were on the hill again. There was judgment. There was thunder. Someone screamed. They approach, cautiously, reverently. not to worship, but to observe. And just like that, the myth begins to root. Ares is gone by the time they arrive, nothing left but dust and the faint scent of burnt myrrh. But the mortals see the scar. They whisper. They wonder. And eventually, they decide this place must be sacred. This is where gods debated murder. This is where justice first stood beside rage and tried to make sense of it. And from that whisper, a new tradition will bloom the Areopagus court. Trials held in the shadow of Olympus. Laws born not from logic, but from divine memory. Historians still argue whether that's true, of course. Whether the myth of Ares' trial created the court, or whether the court existed first and simply needed a myth to justify it. But to you standing in this moment, the answer is simple. It doesn't matter. The myth is the truth now. And as the mortals kneel to touch the groove in the rock, you know that the gods have left their mark not just on the earth, but on time. Somewhere far off, Ares is already walking toward the next war. But here on this hill, a god was judged. And no one, not even Olympus, will forget it. The olive trees sway gently now, their leaves rustling with the kind of reverent hush usually reserved for temples or funeral processions. The storm is over, the thunder spent, but something lingers, a resonance, like the very hill is still processing what it just witnessed. And far down the winding trail, Ares keeps walking. No entourage, no triumphant music, no divine Instagram post with "not guilty." Just the god of war alone with the scent of scorched soil and a memory. You follow him at a respectful distance, of course. He doesn't know you're there. Or maybe he does and just doesn't care. Either is entirely in character. He doesn't take the path down toward the golden cities or temples. He veers off deeper into the wilder woods toward the edge of places still untamed by myth or marble. His steps are slower now. Not weary, Ares doesn't get tired the way mortals do, but weighted. Like he's carrying something that didn't exist before the trial. He pauses by a spring quiet, hidden surrounded by moss-covered rocks that have never known the sound of bronze. You half expect him to draw his blade and train. That's usually how he relaxes. Instead, he kneels. Not to pray. Ares doesn't do that. He cups water in his hands, drinks, watches it drip from his fingers, and then quietly, he speaks. You would have liked it here, he mutters. You know exactly who he's talking to. Halorothius, his victim, his accuser, his catalyst. Ares shakes his head, muttering again. Too full of yourself. Thought being Poseidon's son made you untouchable. Another pause. Longer this time. But maybe I should have spoken first. Now that's unexpected. Ares never second-guesses himself. His whole brand is act first, never ask. But something about this spring, this stillness peels that back. He dips his fingers into the water again, watches the ripples, then says, You were wrong. But maybe I was too. He says it like a blade being driven through armor. With effort, with resistance. Because here's the thing about gods, they don't grow the way mortals do. Their arcs aren't clean. Their lessons aren't guaranteed. They don't always learn. But sometimes, just sometimes they remember. And remembering is a kind of growth. You stay quiet. Let him sit in it. In the moment. In the memory. It's rare. Then from the woods behind him, there's a soft snap of a twig. He turns instantly, already reaching for his spear, but relaxes when he sees who it is. Alcippe, his daughter. She's not dressed like a goddess. No shining circlet, no swirling wind or celestial entourage. Just simple clothes. A bow slung across her back. Dirt under her fingernails. She sits beside him without speaking. Doesn't ask what he's doing. Doesn't lecture. Doesn't cry. Just sits. They don't talk for a long time. When they finally do, it's simple. You're still angry, she says. Always, he replies. Me too. They both nod. You feel like you're intruding, but you don't leave. Because there's something sacred about watching a god of war share silence with the only thing in his life he ever tried to protect instead of destroy. I didn't mean for it to happen like that, Ares murmurs. I know, she says. You never asked for me to intervene. I never had to. She leans back, rests her head against the same rock he's leaning on. You didn't save me because I was helpless, she says. You saved me because you knew I'd survive. But you couldn't let someone take the choice away. He turns his head, eyes sharp. Exactly. And there it is. The core. It was never just about rage. It was about control. About a god who saw his daughter's agency about to be stolen and did the only thing he knew how to do stop it. Violently, absolutely. The gods may not understand that. But you do. And she does. You'll be judged again, she says. He snorts. Already been judged. Not by them, by you. He doesn't respond. Because she's right. The real trial never ended. Not on the hill. Not with the verdict. Not even with Nemesis watching from the trees. It's happening now inside Ares. And for someone forged in fire and blood, it's the quietest fight of his life. They sit together until the stars blink awake. No chariots arrive. No heralds. Just the sounds of insects and the occasional owl. And then finally she stands. He does too. They don't hug. Of course not. But before she walks away, she places her hand on his shoulder. It's the only touch he doesn't flinch from. And then she's gone fading into the brush, like a huntress in her element. Ares watches her go, then turns back to the spring. He doesn't speak again, but when he walks away, you notice he leaves the water undisturbed. No footprints, no scorch marks, just ripples, like a god trying for once to leave less of a mark. You trail Ares from the spring, expecting him to vanish, to flicker into the ether like most gods do, when their dramatic arcs wrap up neatly. But he doesn't. He walks, step by step. No fanfare. Just the faint clink of bronze against leather and the rhythmic crunch of gravel beneath his sandals. The night deepens around him. The stars overhead brighten into pinpricks of cool fire constellations, winding silently above this god who has seen them shift over centuries. You pass a grove of cypress trees, their shadows long and whispering. And for the first time in what feels like ages, the war god turns his gaze not inward but outward, toward the world. He sees it all. The cities of men, their torches flickering like hopeful lies. The stone temples slowly climbing into the sky. The echo of prayers sent up to Olympus with desperate hands. You wonder, what does a god of war see in peace? He pauses near a ridge where you can see the Athenian plain below. The fields are sleeping now, vineyards curled up under moonlight. And in the farthest edge beyond the silver horizon, you see movement. A small skirmish. Probably bandits. Ares watches it without interest, like an old general reading the morning paper. But then he says something you didn't expect. They'll never stop. You glance at him. The mortals. He nods. They'll always find something to fight about. Borders. Gods. The shape of a cup. The color of a robe. He chuckles darkly. I once saw a war start because of a goat. Did you start it? No. But I made it worse. He shrugs. But that's the thing. I don't make war. I am war. I show up after the shouting. I stand in the places no one else wants to be. And then under his breath, like a confession not meant for Olympus, they call me the villain. But I'm just the echo. You sit with that. He continues. You know who the real threat is. The ones who never lift swords. The ones who start fires with ideas and never feel the heat. His eyes scan the stars. They make me look like a blunt tool, but at least you can see me coming. It's jarring, this Ares. Not loud, not furious, reflective, but not soft. Never soft. The conversation turns as the wind picks up warm and restless. Ares draws a small knife from his belt and kneels beside a juniper shrub. Without ceremony, he cuts a few sprigs and tucks them into a pouch. You blink. You garden. Sometimes, he mutters. Juniper masks bloodstains. Good for the battlefield. Of course. Even the things that grow in his world are still shaped by violence. You continue walking, and then up ahead, torchlight. You find yourselves nearing a camp. Mortals. Small. Unarmed. A family, maybe travelers. They don't see you. Or maybe they do, and just assume you're another dusty pilgrim. But the child, the youngest, he looks up, sees Ares, and stares. You brace for something terrible. But instead, the boy simply says, you look like a story. Ares freezes, and in the awkward pause, the child's mother grabs his hand, muttering something about manners. Ares says nothing. He just walks past them, boots scuffing the dirt. But after a few paces, he stops, turns slightly, and says to the boy, I am, and keeps walking. You stand there for a moment. watching the family resume their quiet dinner. The boy cranes his neck to follow Oris's figure as it fades into the dark. The gods may claim they don't meddle, but that boy, he'll tell the story for the rest of his life. And someone will hear it. And someone will write it down. And that's how myth spreads. Not through temples or thrones or lightning bolts, but through children who look at a scarred stranger and see something ancient stirring behind the eyes. You catch up to Ares again, but he doesn't say anything more for a while. When he finally does, his voice is low. I wonder if he'll remember me as a monster. You don't answer. He doesn't need one, because the truth is he is a monster, in the sense that monsters are honest, visible, unapologetic. But he's also something else. A reminder that even gods bleed, that justice isn't clean. That peace is not the absence of war, but the shadow it casts. Ares stops once more at the base of a hill now bathed in starlight. He looks up toward Olympus, not longingly, just assessing, as if calculating how far it is, and whether it's worth the climb. You know he'll return there. Not today, but eventually. Because war always returns. Even when you think it's over. Especially when you think it's over. Morning creeps up behind the hills like a hesitant guest painting the landscape in cold silver and reluctant gold. The world doesn't wake all at once. It yawns, stretches, and blinks into consciousness, unaware that gods walked its ridges the night before and weighed mortal justice against divine instinct. Ares watches the sun rise without reverence. Soothe. He's not a sunrise kind of deity, but he respects it. You can tell. There's something about the way he tracks its ascent, not with awe, but with wariness. Light's too honest, he mutters. You smirk. He doesn't. Darkness hides everything he adds. Blood, guilt, even kindness. But sunlight. It puts all the mess on display. He's not wrong. You both look out at the fresh landscape below. Smoke from early morning hearths curls upward from villages you can't name. Olive trees stand stiff in the wind. A farmer curses at a mule. The world in its infinite banality spins forward. But you don't move, because something ancient stirs beneath your feet. You feel it before you see it. A vibration, a pressure, like someone flicking the spine of the world. And then, on the path below, walking with the kind of authority that says, I don't knock, comes a figure wrapped in black. Not Nemesis, not a fury, but close. You've read about her, Dike, goddess of justice, not the showy thunder-wielding kind. The quiet, law-bound, ledger-keeping kind. Daughter of Zeus and Themis. The balance to Ares's chaos. She approaches without sound. Her robe is not silky or glowing. It's rough, woven with symbols you recognize from temple walls and law tablets. Her eyes are sharp, her expression unreadable, and most unnervingly, she's holding a scroll. You feel Ares tense beside you, not from fear, but from expectation. Dike doesn't address you. She doesn't address Olympus. She addresses the record. Ares, she says, voice crisp as parchment, your actions have been reviewed, judged, and recorded. She unrolls the scroll. You are not guilty. Ares says nothing, but you are not clean. That lands like a spear. She continues, this verdict rendered by gods moved by testimonies shaken by truths was not unanimous, nor absolute. She locks eyes with him. You are not absolved. You are merely endured. You flinch. Ares doesn't, because what could be more familiar to him than that Dike steps closer? Do you know what justice really is? She asks. Ares tilts his head, a sword with a blindfold. She doesn't smile. Justice, she says, is compromise on fire. It is truth melted into form. It is an imperfect blade, kept sharp through scrutiny. She lets that linger. You are part of that now. Ares frowns. Part of what she rolls the scroll tightly, tucks it away. Precedent. That word rings through the hills like a distant gong. Because gods rarely set precedent. Gods are myth. Precedents are for mortals. And yet this trial, this moment, this verdict, it will echo. Dike steps back. Before she vanishes, she offers one last truth: you will be spoken of. Not as hero, not as villain, but as the god who acted. Then she turns and walks back the way she came, vanishing into the landscape like a shadow melting into stone. Ares exhales. Do you think she rehearses that stuff, he mutters. You laugh. He doesn't. Because he knows what just happened. He became a case study. You begin walking again. This time, the path leads down not into woods or war, but toward the edge of civilization. Small homes, weary shrines, places where people still pray to gods. They both fear and forget. I'll be a story now, Ares says. You already were. He nods. But now I'm a lesson. There's a silence. Then with grim amusement he adds, worst punishment of all. He steps through a grove and pauses at a stone marker. It's nothing impressive, just a hunk of marble with faded writing. But it's the beginning of something. A courthouse, a shrine, a school, no, a bench, a place to sit, to think. Someone carved a line into the rock, fresh and hesitant. The gods judged one of their own here. Ares traces it with his finger. Underneath, someone added another line, probably immortal. And still the sun rose. He smiles. Not because he finds it hopeful, but because it's true. The world didn't end. The gods didn't fall. And somewhere, someone will quote this place as the reason they believe in justice. Even if they don't know what really happened. Even if they never will. Ares stands, stretches, and picks up his spear. Not for war. Not yet. But because he never walks without it. He turns to you, his only silent witness, and says, let's go, as if you have somewhere else to be. You follow him. Because sometimes walking with a god of war after a courtroom drama is safer than trying to explain it to anyone else. And besides, history is watching now. The road curves again, threading between low hills and sleeping fields, and Ares keeps moving, never fast, never rushed, but with that slow, dangerous pace of someone who has never once needed to hurry to win. You've started to notice something odd. He doesn't look back. Not once. Not at the Areopagus, not at Olympus, not even at the grove where his daughter vanished into the brush. It's not detachment. It's not coldness. It's certainty. Ares doesn't revisit things. Not because he forgets them, but because he carries them forward. And now you can feel that burden forming in the invisible space around him, the weight of memory not mourned but sharpened, shaped, repurposed into something future-facing. He stops briefly at a crossroads, literally, an ancient fork where three dusty paths meet. One leads toward battle. Smoke rises in the distance. Another veers toward cities and marble and politics. And the third leads into the wilderness where myths go to decay in the moss. You wonder which way he'll go. He doesn't choose immediately. He just stands there squinting against the breeze, spear balanced across his back like an afterthought. That's when Hermes appears again. Not in a flash of light this time. Just walks up, casually, humming, dust on his sandals, scroll under one arm as if he's been jogging through reality and decided to pop in. Nice verdict, Hermes says with a grin. I had 4 drachmas unbanished. Guess I owe myself money now. Ares doesn't respond. Hermes leans against a cypress post and kicks a pebble. So, what's next? Ares lifts a brow. You tell me. You're the messenger. Me. Hermes laughs. I just deliver news, not futures. He pulls out the scroll and taps it against his palm. Although between us, word's spreading fast. Mortals love a messy god story, especially one with courtroom drama. You're basically a scroll bestseller now. Ares grunts. Great. Can't wait for the tribute plays. Hermes winks. You'll hate everyone, especially the ones where you're the villain and the fool. He sobers slightly. But you know the truth will get buried, right? Ares shrugs. It always does. That lands. Because that's the rule, isn't it? The gods argue. The myths echo. The mortals rewrite. And somewhere along the way, the screams, the sweat, the actual moment of why things happened turns into a metaphor about honor or fate or civic duty. Still, Hermes adds, you could shape the story a little. Ares turns. You mean spin it. I mean, talk to the poets. Give them a version that paints you with a little more nuance. Maybe wear a white cloak next time. Ares actually laughs. Nuance doesn't win wars. No, Hermes agrees. But it writes history. Another silence. Then Ares asks almost idly, "And what will they say about him?" Hermes knows who he means. Halorotheus, Poseidon's son. The spark that lit this entire divine powder keg. Hermes hesitates. Some will call him a victim, he says carefully. Others won't. Ares nods. He already knows this. They'll argue about it, Hermes adds. Priest judges philosophers' kids in agora debates. Some will say you saved Alcippe. Some will say you overreacted. A few, maybe the smart ones, will say you did both. Ares doesn't move. Then Hermes offers him the scroll. Want to add a footnote, Ares looks at it, takes it, and without breaking eye contact, burns it. Flame leaps up from his palm, turns the scroll to ash in seconds. Hermes stares at the curling smoke. Dramatic, he mutters. Necessary. Ares replies, why no story should outlive its truth. And with that, he turns from the crossroads and walks straight down the middle path. Not the warfront, not the city, not the wilderness. Something else. Hermes calls after him. You know, they'll put statues of you on that hill, right? Ares doesn't slow. I know. They'll put your name on walls, in laws, in oaths. I know. They'll call you protector, or monster, or both. Still no reaction. Then, finally Ares says over his shoulder, as long as they remember who screamed, I don't care what they call me. Hermes watches him go. You do too. Because this, the trial, the gods, the verdict, it wasn't the climax. This is the part where the story doesn't end. Where the judgment fades, but the weight remains. Where a god walks, not because he won, but because walking away was the only thing left to do. You stay at the crossroads a moment longer. The dust settles. The smoke from the scroll swirls upward, unreadable now. Hermes vanishes, and all that remains is the road. One scarred god walking forward. One scream echoing in divine memory. One truth too complicated for legend to contain. You follow the path, though the dust has long since swallowed Ares' footprints. The road he took isn't marked on any mortal map. It winds between myth and memory, cutting through places that exist more in story than geography. And soon you come to one such place. It's not a battlefield, not a temple, just a clearing. Peaceful. Too peaceful. Like the land itself is pretending not to remember. There's a small stream, the kind that only exists in mythic settings, crystal clear babbling, as if rehearsing lines for an epic. The grass is soft. The light doesn't pierce, it settles. And yet, there's something off. You notice it slowly. The silence here feels weighted. Like a conversation just ended. Or a judgment still lingers. And then you see it, three figures seated at the edge of the clearing. They're not talking, just watching. Not the gods. Not Ares. The Furies. Again, they've returned. But this time they don't hover in shadow. They sit hands resting in their laps, looking not at the world, but through it. Their hair no longer writhes. Their eyes no longer glow. But the tension in their bodies tells you judgment is never truly over. You hesitate. And then one of them speaks. Quietly. The gods have spoken, she says, but the world has not. You glance around. There's no audience. No jury, just this quiet moment and a feeling in your chest, like someone just rang a bell under your ribs. Another fury nods toward the stream. Mortals will come here. They always do. Where gods walk, memory takes root. And memory adds that the third is a dangerous kind of justice. You kneel at the stream's edge, unsure why. Maybe to listen. Maybe to avoid eye contact. And that's when they tell you the thing no one else would. The trial was never for Ares, one of them says. You blink. What it was for them. She gestures outward, not toward the gods, but toward the world. Mortals, cities, lawmakers, the storytellers scribbling their truths into fragile scrolls. You think Olympus holds power, she says. It doesn't. Not really. Another adds, what holds power is repetition. The stories told. The judgments inherited. The rituals repeated until they're no longer remembered, they're expected. That's what this trial becomes. Not an event, a structure, a precedent, a pattern. You suddenly understand. This wasn't just about Halorotheus. It wasn't even about Alcippe. It was about how gods explained themselves to mortals. Ares was just the lens. And the lens is cracked. You'll see it again, the third fury says. In temples, in courts, in marketplaces. This trial will be replayed 1,000 times. But never with gods, says the second. always with men. You feel a chill, not cold, deeper, an awareness. The Furies rise. They don't vanish this time. They walk, slowly, together, toward the line of trees. But before they disappear, the lead Fury turns. Tell the story, she says, but not just the verdict. You frown. What then? She smiles just slightly. Tell them about the scream. And then they're gone. You sit in the grass a while watching the water, listening. And then you hear it. Not a voice, not a shout, just a faint echo, a ripple in the air, a memory not yours. The sound of Alcipe screaming. It's not dramatic. It's not long. It's not embellished. It's real. And it lingers. You finally rise and begin walking again, back toward the edge of the myth, toward the places where gods aren't seen, only blamed, where temples rise and fall, where people swear oaths to gods they've never met and punish men for sins they only half understand. You carry the story with you, not the tidy version, not the one carved into courthouse walls, the messy one, the one with screams and hesitation, and a god who almost asked a question before he struck. That version, it may not become a statue, but it will become something else, a shadow behind every rule, a whisper in every verdict, a reminder that justice, real justice, doesn't wear armor. It listens, even when it's too late. The trail is dust now, not the dramatic kind kicked up by war horses or carried in the wake of divine sandals. Just old, ordinary dust settling on rocks, clinging to olive roots, sighing in your footsteps. You realize something as you walk. You're not following Ares anymore. You're walking with him, not side by side, not in some grand buddy myth way, but in rhythm. His story is under your feet now, in the land, in the cracked grooves on the Areopagus, in the words mortals will speak even when they forget where they came from. And now a new sound joins the breeze. Voices. You crest a hill and look down upon a gathering, not a city, not a war camp, but something in between. A few tents, a wooden scaffold parchment stretched over planks, scribes, builders, priests, a speaker's platform, curious spectators watching from crates and stone walls. And at the center, a man rehearsing. Not a god, a playwright. He clears his throat. In the second act, he sees to the group, Ares pleads, but not with words, with his silence. You blink. Is that how they're going to tell it? He continues. Then Athena says, even gods must bow to law. And Ares kneels. You almost laugh. Ares bowing. You glance sideways. There's no trace of him here, of course. He's long gone from this path, but you can't help wondering what he'd say if he saw this. Probably something short and cutting, like, I should have flattened their props. But here's the thing. It doesn't matter what's true. It matters what's repeatable. This performance will travel. It will be copied. It will be memorized by actors, recited by children, engraved on the marble of future courthouses. And Ares, who never once thought of himself as poetic, will become a symbol. You approach the stage. The playwright notices you gestures to a scroll. We're dramatizing the judgment of Ares. For civic reflection. You nod, feigning casual interest. He points to the final line. I gave him a monologue. Would you like to hear it? Of course you would. He steps onto the makeshift platform, lifts his chin, and begins. I am the god they summon when law fails. I am not right. I am not wrong. I am the blade drawn in desperation. You fear me not because I kill, but because you know I will never lie about it. He bows. The audience claps softly. You nod. It's well written. A little too clean. But that's myth, isn't it? Sharpen the edges, smooth the contradictions. You leave the amphitheater in progress behind. Let them rehearse. Let them sculpt Ares into whatever shape they need. He won't care, because he wasn't trying to be remembered. He was trying to protect. And you carry the other version, the unstageable one, the one where a scream mattered more than a legacy. Further down the path, another sign of mortal order. A courthouse. Not grand, just a stone building with a carved lintel and uneven columns. A judge sits outside sipping water, wiping sweat from his brow. You overhear two elders arguing about a neighbor's inheritance. They speak in low tones, but their voices rise like a miniature battle hymn. And then the judge says something that stops you cold. Let's take it to the hill. where the gods first weighed a life. There it is, not a decree, a reflex. Even now, the Areopagus holds weight, because mortals need to believe that justice came from something older, something divine. Even if that origin involved fury and blood and gods who didn't ask questions fast enough. That's the secret truth, isn't it? Justice doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to echo. And Ares, he is that echo. Unwanted, unrefined, but undeniable. You sit under an olive tree, the same kind that's been growing on this land since long before the first myth was ever carved into stone. The breeze smells of dust charcoal and fig leaves. You watch mortals argue, then shake hands. You watch a child practicing a mock trial with dolls one in a tiny red cape. The story is already moving on, shifting, growing, forgetting and remembering and forgetting again. And through it all, the god of war keeps walking. Not toward peace, but toward something quieter. A place where his name no longer precedes him like thunder, where he can be not the villain, not the symbol, just the god who acted. And that will be enough. Eventually, the road vanishes altogether. No more stones, no more stamped dirt or worn ruts from merchant carts, just meadow stretching like a soft exhale across a forgotten corner of the world. You didn't know Greece had places like this, wild and gentle at the same time. Like the gods forgot to leave footprints here. You're still walking less because you know where to go, and more because you can't stop. The trial has ended, the verdict delivered, but somehow it's not over. And then far ahead you see him, Ares, again, seated this time, alone on a hillside overlooking a cliff. The sea stretches out beyond him, bright and indifferent. He doesn't turn when you approach. He's holding something, a helmet, not his own. It's older, simpler, the kind worn by foot soldiers, mortals. He runs a thumb along the edge, not reverently, just curiously, as if he's trying to remember who gave it to him or who he took it from. This belonged to a boy, he says, still not looking at you. Fought like he had something to prove. Did he? Of course not. But that never stops anyone. He sets the helmet down. You sit next to him. The breeze lifts strands of dark hair from his face. The sea below crashes in lazy rhythm. It feels strange to see Ares here quiet still, as if some part of him knows the world doesn't require him right now, and he's not sure what to do with the silence. You think they'll keep the hill sacred? He asks. You pause. Yes. He grunts. They'll ruin it with plaques. They'll light lamps. Teach their children. He rolls his eyes. Worse. But there's no venom in it. Just inevitability. Because even gods can't stop the swell of time. Especially not gods who've seen civilizations rise and fall like breath. Alcipe won't go back, he says after a while. Not to Olympus. Not to ceremony. She doesn't need to. He nods. She's more like her mother. You don't ask who that is. Some things even in myth stay private. She'll be a myth one day too, he adds. But not for screaming. For surviving. You glance at him, and there it is again. That thing beneath the rage, beneath the armor, beneath the centuries of blood remorse. Not guilt. Just that quiet, unshakable ache that comes from knowing something broke and you were the one who snapped it, even if you had to. You look out at the ocean with him. The horizon is crisp clean, almost too straight, as if the gods ran out of inspiration halfway through drawing the world. And for a long time neither of you speaks. Then finally Ares shifts. You ever wonder he says what we are without mortals? It's a sharp question. Sharper than anything he's thrown in court. Because if no one needs gods, do gods exist? You don't answer. You're not sure you can. Ares continues. Once they begged for me, invoked my name before battle, carved it into shields, bled for it. He picks up the helmet again. Now they put me in place. His tone isn't angry. It's tired. But then a beat later he laughs low bitter. Maybe that's better. I've never liked when people die shouting my name. You smile a little. He stands, brushes off his legs. The wind tugs at his crimson cloak, and for the first time since the trial, he doesn't look like a warrior. He looks like a memory. Not fading, but moving. And then, he says something so quietly, you almost miss it. She screamed once. You nod. She doesn't anymore. He nods back, then tosses the helmet into the sea. It arcs high, catches a flash of sun, and vanishes into the blue with a faint splash. And just like that, it's gone. Like the trial, like the testimony, like Halirotheus. But the ripples remain. Always. Ares walks away from the cliff without a word. You follow, of course you do. Not because he asked, not because you're invited, but because once you've witnessed a God-faced judgment, it's hard to just return to normal. Whatever normal ever was. He leads you into a forest this time. Not the haunted kind. Not myth-soaked or prophecy-plagued. Just trees. Honest, fragrant, sun-speckled trees. They creak and sway with the wind, and for a moment they don't seem to care who he is. Maybe that's why he came here. At a clearing, Ares stops. There's no altar, no hidden cave or oracle stone. Just moss and roots and the hum of insects going about their daily business, wholly indifferent to divine drama. He kneels again without ceremony and pulls something out of the earth, a shield. Cracked, scorched, and nearly split down the middle. He sets it upright against a stump, then sits beside it as if expecting it to speak. It doesn't, but you do. What is that? He glances at you. It was mine, he says. First one I ever made myself. You raise an eyebrow. You made it. It. He nods. Before the Smiths, before the favors, before Olympus thought I needed gold to be feared. He runs a hand along the rim. The leather is stiff with age, the metal dull. But you can still see the faint impression of a horse's head, stamped in the center, his old emblem. Long before the red plumes and skull motifs. Used to think it was invincible. He mutters. It looks like it lost. He smiles without humor. It did. You sit with that for a moment. He doesn't say who he fought. He doesn't need to. The shield isn't about the battle. It's about the idea that even the god of war once believed in things that could break. And maybe he still does. Eventually, he leans the shield back against the stump, like putting away an old photo. And then from somewhere behind you comes a sound you haven't heard in hours. Music. Not celestial. Not grand. Just mortal. A reed flute faint and unpracticed. You turn and spot a boy in the distance no older than 10 seated beneath a fig tree, trying to coax a tune out of the breeze. He sees Ares. Freezes. You brace for a reaction. Ares doesn't move. He watches the boy. And the boy, sensing something strange but not threatening, returns to his flute. A new tune this time. Simpler, softer. And the strangest thing happens. Ares listens. Truly listens. You don't think you've ever seen him still for so long without preparing to strike, or sneer, or scoff. But here he is, watching a mortal child shape, breath into melody, and something in him shifts. Not visibly, not dramatically, but you feel it, like a knot inside him loosening half a turn. Maybe because that's all he ever wanted, for the world to be safe enough for music to matter more than steel. He stands at last, walks toward the boy. You rise uneasy, but he just kneels. The boy looks up nervous, wide-eyed, and Ares says something you never expected. Don't stop. You're getting better. The boy blinks, then tentatively nods, and keeps playing. Ares walks away. No thanks, no applause, just a god walking into the trees again. You catch up. Was that mercy, you ask? No, he replies. Kindness. He shrugs. Recognition. And you get it. That boy. He'll never know what truly happened today. He won't know about Halirotheus, the trial, the scream, the verdict, or the gods who weighed silence like gold dust. But he will remember the man in red who listened to him play. And maybe one day he'll tell the story wrong. Call him a hero, a protector, a stranger from the woods who guarded music with a sword. And maybe that story will be enough to stop someone else from raising a hand too quickly, or to make someone ask a question before they strike. That's how myth works. It lingers in moments. And Ares. He's starting to understand that too. Not the myth they carved for him. The myth he's quietly making now. One kindness at a time. Ares doesn't linger after the music fades. He keeps moving, always forward, always away from the places that try to define him. You follow. It's easier now. The air feels less like iron, more like cedar. The trees thin, revealing distant hills. And beneath them, for the first time in a while, you see mortals again. Not soldiers, builders. A new settlement is taking shape in a valley below rough stone walls. Wagons offloaded, with timber. A gathering space in the center, with rope outlines, where columns will one day rise. Children run across packed earth. Elders argue about nothing urgent. It's a world trying to start again, and Ares pauses to watch. You half expect him to scoff. But instead, he says something strange. Do you hear that? You listen. Hammering, laughter, some poor soul yelling at a donkey. Normal stuff. He smiles faintly, no screaming. And that from the god of war is high praise. You both stand there for a while, not speaking, just observing. The way one might study a painting in progress, unsure whether it's beautiful or just unfinished. Then a voice breaks the quiet. You don't look like a builder. You turn to find an old man leaning on a staff staring right at Ares. He has the eyes of someone who's survived more winters than most temples and the tone of someone too old to care who he's speaking to. I'm not, Ares replies. Then, why watch us work? Because no one's bleeding. The old man squints. You a priest? That almost makes Ares laugh. No, lawgiver. Definitely not. The old man leans closer. You fought. Ares nods. For what? He pauses. For someone who couldn't. The old man studies him a while, then gives a satisfied grunt. Good enough. And walks away. You blink. Ares watches him go. I miss that, he mutters. What? When everything was simple. Shield, sword, enemy. You think that's better? I think it was clear. He glances at the town. This is hard. You nod, because he's not wrong. War is loud, brutal, awful. But at least it declares itself. Peace is complicated. It requires restraint, memory, humility, qualities Ares was not exactly forged for. Still, he stays. He watches as a woman draws chalk lines across the future wall of what might become a school. A child drops a bucket and is scolded. Two men share bread under a fig tree. You can tell he wants to move. His hand twitches near his weapon. His whole body hums with unspent momentum. But he doesn't go. Not yet. He turns to you instead. You think they'll make it. You ask the town. He nods. You say, depends on whether they remember what it cost to not fight. He seems to consider that. And then, for the first time, you see him soften not in posture, but in presence. Like some sharp edge inside him dulls a degree. He points toward the central building, just frame in timber. Now, they'll name that. After someone, he says. They always do. You ask, you want it to be you. He smirks. Gods don't build schools. We burn them down. You say nothing. Because here's the secret. Ares doesn't want statues. He doesn't want the courtroom drama etched in stone. He wants silence. He wants a field where no one screams. He wants children who don't know what his name means. And even he's not sure what to do with that. You walk again, leaving the builders to their work. Eventually, the trail thins, leading into scrubland where no divine step echoes. Ares finally says, do you think they'll forget? You glance at him. No. The scream. You don't answer. Because they will. Eventually. But maybe not today. Maybe not for a while. And maybe that's enough. By now, the road is more suggestion than path, just patches of earth where weeds haven't quite reclaimed everything. The terrain gets rougher, dustier, dotted with thorny bushes and boulders, worn smooth by centuries of wind. Ares doesn't mind. In fact, he seems more comfortable here where the world forgets names and doesn't ask for statues. Eventually, the sun begins its descent. Long shadows stretch across the landscape, painting everything gold and bruised purple. You've walked most of the day with him, and still he hasn't asked you to leave. Maybe you're part of the judgment now, too, a witness that outlived the verdict. He finally stops near a half-buried column. Not from a palace. From something older. You can't tell what it used to be. A shrine, a grave, a memory. He places his hand on the stone and closes his eyes. And then he speaks not to you. To someone else. You would have lied. There's no answer, but I still would have believed you. You realize he's talking to Halorotheus. It's not a confession, it's a realization. If you'd begged, cried, sworn you were innocent, I might have stopped. He opens his eyes, and I would have regretted it. You don't know what to say, but he doesn't need a response. He just needed to say it. To someone. To anyone. You sit beside him, and for a while, neither of you speaks. Eventually, he pulls something from a pouch on his belt. A small token. A carved wooden horse. Simple, rough, no ornamentation. You ask yours. He nods. I made it. A long time ago. Before I knew how to carve properly. Before Olympus. You examine it. The legs are uneven. One side of the face is chipped. It's perfect. He sets it gently atop the stone column. Not like an offering. Not like a trophy. Just a placeholder. You think anyone will find that you ask? He shrugs. I hope not. And then he laughs low, dry, but real. Imagine the stories they'd invent. You smile. Some child will find it and swear it's a relic from Troy, or the saddle piece of a war god's favorite mount. You both chuckle, but then his gaze shifts again, farther out, toward a sliver of coastline where the water is black with dusk. You follow his eyes. Ships. Small ones. Merchant sails probably, but they carry something Oris recognizes from miles away. Tension. The way they move too quickly, too close together, like something wrong is brewing below their decks. He doesn't say it, but he knows. Something's coming. Not war. Not yet. But the tremor before it. He watches in silence. The sun is a half-melted coin on the horizon now slipping behind the sea like it wants no part of tomorrow. You finally ask, will you go to them? He waits, then says, I always do. And that's the part most myths leave out. Ares doesn't start wars. He answers them, like thunder answering a scream. He rises from the stone, brushes dust from his knees. You think they'll welcome me? He asks, voice dry. No, you say, but they'll call for you anyway. He nods. Because that's what always happens. The world builds, the world forgets. Then the world burns, and it remembers. He starts walking again. Not quickly. Not yet. But you can see it in his posture, how he stiffens as the wind changes, how his feet find sure footing again, how his hand hovers closer to his weapon. The courtroom is behind him, but his trial never ends, because there's always another scream, another verdict, another broken silence. You follow him a little farther, then stop, because this part of the road doesn't belong to you. It never did. And he knows. He turns once, just once, and says, thanks. You don't answer. You don't need to. Because this God, he finally heard something. And maybe, just maybe, it made all the difference. You remain standing there long after Ares disappears over the next hill. Just you, the stone column, and that crooked little wooden horse balanced on top like the world's smallest monument to something nobody wants to admit. Happened. Ares won't be back this way. He doesn't revisit ground. Once, he's burned it. And this place, this scar in the shape of a courtroom, a memory, a daughter's scream has given him everything it could. So now it's yours. And you don't quite know what to do with it. Because how do you carry a story that refuses to settle? One that starts with a scream, ends with a shrug, and leaves a god walking into dusk. You turn toward the fading light. From this height, you can just barely make out the silhouette of the Areopagus, far behind now. Small. Insignificant. Just another hill among thousands in the cracked skin of Greece. But it's more than that now, because word has spread. A pair of travelers pass below whispering about the trial. A farmer at a crossroads asks if the god of war is still in the area. Two temple servants collect olive branches from the grove, with exaggerated reverence, not because the trees are special, but because he passed through them. A myth has started to grow. It's already changing shape. In one version, Halorotheus becomes a martyr. In another, a monster. Some say Alcippe never screamed at all. Some say the entire trial was theater, a play staged by the gods to teach mortals fear. And Ares, he's all things now. A protector, a murderer, a joke, a father, a case study, a precedent. You walk through a village square and hear a young man reciting a monologue. He paces dramatically before a handful of sleepy neighbors, hand raised to the heavens. I do not beg. I do not explain. I am Ares and I act while others deliberate. The crowd claps. You cringe. Because that's not what he said. But this is how it begins. Truth becomes performance, and performance becomes law. Later, in a crowded marketplace, you overhear a priest shouting about divine justice. He quotes Athena. He references the trial. And then he says something that stops you cold. Let us remember that even the gods must be accountable. The crowd cheers. And for the first time, you realize something startling. Maybe Ares didn't lose anything at all. Maybe he gave something. A blueprint. Not for war. For reckoning. Because the moment a god stood on trial, publicly visibly surrounded by peers, and judged by action, not title, a door opened. Not for gods. For humans. Because if Ares can be held accountable, so can kings. So can judges. So can anyone who mistakes silence for permission. Historians will argue about this forever. Whether the myth was propaganda or parable. Whether the court of the Areopagus existed before the story or the story birthed the court. But you know, you were there. You saw the gods look uncomfortable. You saw Athena hesitate. You saw Ares flinch not at the verdict, but at the scream. And that scream, it still echoes. Not because of its volume, because someone answered. You sit by a fountain as the moon rises. The villagers begin lighting oil lamps. There's laughter in the air. A dog steals a piece of bread. Life continues. But beneath it all, threaded between the sounds buried just beneath the cobblestones and altar smoke, you hear it again. The faintest whisper. A question without an answer. Not, was he guilty? But, would you have done the same? And maybe that's why the trial matters. Not because of its outcome, but because of what it forced everyone, god, mortal, and myth, to consider. You leave the village behind not because there's nowhere else to go, but because something in you insists the journey isn't finished until the silence speaks first. The road grows quiet again. No more whispers of myth or echoes of judgment. Just the hush of night draped across the hills and the breath of the world settling after too much remembering. You crest one last ridge and there it is, the Areopagus, bathed in moonlight. Not grand, not ominous, just still. You sit on a stone, one of the same where gods once slouched, argued, ruled. It's cold, slightly damp, and entirely real. This is where the trial happened, and this is where it ended. No more thunderbolts, no more divine cross-examinations, just an empty hill and the memory of voices. And in this quiet your thoughts drift, not to Ares, not to Halirrhothios, not even to Alcippe, but to what it means to be seen, to be held in judgment, not by your enemies, but by your equals. That's what Ares faced, and he didn't break. He didn't beg. He didn't apologize. But he stood there. And that was the moment that changed everything. Not the scream, not the verdict, the standing. Gods don't stand trial. Not usually. They destroy. They disappear. They deflect. But Ares stood. And in doing so, he allowed something dangerous to happen. Doubt. In Olympus. In myth. In himself. He allowed a story to exist where war wasn't just necessary, but questionable. And maybe that's what this whole trial was really about. Not whether the god of war was guilty, but whether the gods themselves could be questioned. And now you know the answer. They can. They don't like it, but they can. Ares has gone, off to whatever smoldering corner of the world still wants a name to scream when their sons march to die. But you stay a little longer, because this place doesn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It feels like something else, a threshold. The moment when Olympus looked at its own reflection and didn't flinch. Not much anyway. You lie back on the stone staring at stars so bright they feel like they're pressing into your eyes. And as your limbs grow heavy and the sounds of the hill melt into the hush of early sleep, a thought lands quietly beside you. Justice isn't clean. It isn't sharp. It isn't even fair. But when it listens, it leaves a mark. And somewhere out there, a god is still walking. Still carrying the verdict. Still asking himself if he did the right thing. And maybe he always will. Maybe that's justice too. The stars above you pulse slowly now, as if dimming just enough to let your breath match their rhythm. The hill is silent, not tense, not waiting. Just quiet in the way only old places can be, where every breeze carries memory. But none of it needs to be said aloud anymore. You close your eyes. The cold stone beneath you warms with your stillness. You imagine Ares not in armor, not mid-battle, but walking a shoreline barefoot, leaving footprints that the tide erases behind him one by one. No war horns, no verdicts, just the sound of the sea. And in that image, there's something soft. No one wins these stories, not really. But someone always learns how to carry the weight a little better. You let your breath slow. Inhale. Exhale. Like waves on a trial-washed shore. The scream is gone now. And in its place, a ripple. A whisper. A promise to listen harder next time. Because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just a quiet voice that refuses to go silent. Let that voice fade now. Let the story soften. Let the gods sleep. Let yourself go. You're safe. You're still. You're not on trial here. You're simply resting beside the echoes. Good night.